The forest of Ravensmire was not just quiet, it was unnatural. The trees did not move with the wind, because no wind ever touched that part of the land. The air hung heavy like a wet blanket, choking every breath with an invisible pressure. Birds never flew over it, animals avoided it, and even the insects seemed to disappear near the old tracks that led to the tunnel. Locals said the land around the tunnel was hollow, not physically but spiritually, like the ground itself had been emptied of all life long ago. Ravensmire was a place forgotten by the world, and the people who lived nearby liked to keep it that way. No one mentioned the tunnel unless they had to, and when they did, their eyes shifted nervously, as if the very word had weight. It was not just a piece of railway. It was something else, something older than iron and older than time. 100 years ago, a train called the Night Bell departed from a nearby station and headed toward the tunnel on a cold, rainy night. It was supposed to arrive at the next town in 40 minutes, but it never came. No bodies were found, no wreckage, no sound, no smoke, not even the smell of burnt coal. Families waited for days, weeks, years, but no one returned. Search teams were sent, and some of them never came back either. Eventually, the authorities sealed the area and buried the truth under silence and dust. But silence has memory, and the earth never forgets what it has consumed. Over time, a legend took shape, whispered from one generation to another. They said the tunnel was alive, that it chose who would enter and who would vanish. The most terrifying part was not the vanishing, but the idea that maybe those people never died at all. Maybe they were still inside, still screaming, still riding endlessly in a place where time did not move. People claimed to hear strange noises when they walked near the edge of the forest. Some said they saw flickers of lanterns deep between the trees' lights that moved without reason, and voices that came from nowhere. One man claimed he saw a train pass by the old tracks with no one on board, yet the sound of weeping filled the air for hours after it vanished into the mist. No one believed him, but his hair turned white overnight, and he never spoke again. Over time, the railway was buried under vines, dirt, and warnings. Stay away, do not go near, never speak its name. And for decades, the tunnel slept waiting, watching, dreaming. Then one day, the silence broke. A whisper started to travel through town like a sickness. A railway company had purchased the land where the tunnel lay and began clearing it without warning. Trucks moved in during the night, fences were put up. Workers appeared wearing black uniforms and no logos. No one knew where they came from or who had hired them. There were no official reports, no public announcements, only locked gates and flashing red lights deep within the trees. Someone asked the mayor about the project, but he denied knowing anything. A local reporter tried to get close, but was arrested for trespassing and never returned to work again. The town went quiet once more, but this time the silence felt different. It felt like the calm before something ancient rises from the deep, and then it happened. Just past midnight, under a sky filled with slow-moving clouds, a man opened his front door and found a package lying neatly at his doorstep. No knock, no footsteps in the dirt, no sounds of retreat. The envelope was thick yellow and covered in dust like it had been lost for decades. The paper inside was heavier than normal and cold to the touch. It was a train ticket, with no departure time, no return trip, no platform number. Only 6 words were written on it in fading black ink. If you want to know what happened, ride the Midnight Express. There was no signature, no sender, no logo, nothing to trace it back to anyone. And yet the man felt like the ticket had been meant for him all along, as if it had waited for the right moment to appear. He stood there staring at it for hours, unsure whether to fear it or follow it. The air around him felt heavier, the shadows longer and deeper than usual. He could not shake the feeling that something was watching him, not from the trees, but from beneath them, from below the roots, from the soil that once swallowed a train and never gave it back. He looked again at the ticket, and suddenly the world around him felt different, like it had shifted slightly, like the ground beneath his feet no longer belonged to him. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a train horn echoed softly, even though the tracks had not carried a train in 100 years. The train stood still on a dead platform, hidden deep inside the forest where no one had walked for years. There were no lights, no sounds, no footsteps. Only fog moved slowly across the old tracks, like ghostly hands reaching out for something lost. The clock above the station showed 11:59, and yet no one had touched it for decades. The main character stepped forward, holding the strange ticket in his hand. It felt cold like metal, but it pulsed like a heartbeat. He looked around, not a single soul. No conductor, no staff, no signs. Just the train, waiting with its doors wide open like a mouth ready to swallow. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him without a sound. Inside the train was pure silence. There was no driver cabin, no engine sound, nothing that showed who was moving the train. Yet slowly it began to move as if pulled by something unseen. The lights inside flickered weakly like candles about to die. The seats were old and smelled like damp wood and forgotten time. The windows were black from the outside. No reflection, no stars, just darkness. He saw 4 other passengers sitting far from each other. The first was a blind woman sitting straight with a calm face. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved slowly, like she was talking to someone no one else could see. Her hands held a broken wooden bead string, which looked half-burnt. The second was a priest wearing a dusty white robe. His hands kept shaking, and he kept muttering something under his breath. He looked like a man who had faced something evil and could never forget it. He avoided eye contact and sat like he was trapped in his own mind. In the next seat was an old man who did not move at all. He sat with his head down and his hands on his knees. He never blinked, never looked up, and never made a sound. His skin was pale, like he had not seen sunlight in years. His coat looked heavy and smelled like soil. The last was a child not more than 10, holding a small coffin-shaped box tightly against his chest. His face was hidden behind long dark hair, and he kept whispering into the box like there was something or someone inside it. The train entered the tunnel. The lights outside died instantly. Inside the train, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath turned into mist. Then it happened without a single sound. The last coach of the train vanished. 1 second it was there, and the next it was simply gone. No noise, no scream, no break, just silence again. People froze. No one moved, no one spoke. The door behind had vanished. The walls began to change. Lights flickered faster, and the shadows grew longer. The silence was now heavier than sound. Something had begun, and no one could stop it. The train was no longer just moving through darkness. It was now inside something far older and far more dangerous than anyone could understand. The walls of the tunnel outside were not made of stone anymore. They looked like living flesh. They expanded and contracted as if the tunnel itself was breathing. There was a soft, low heartbeat echoing all around, and it was not coming from any machine. It was deep, slow, and alive. The train creaked like it was scared of the path it had entered. Inside the train, the air grew heavier. People began to feel strange. It started slowly. First, their thoughts began to twist. The priest suddenly stood up, sweating, shaking. He screamed that fire was crawling on his skin, but there was no fire, only cold air and shadows. He scratched his arms until blood began to pour. He was crying for help, but no one could see the flames he felt. The blind psychic woman whispered that the tunnel had opened its eyes, and now it was looking directly at each of them. The main character looked outside the window, hoping for light. But outside was a forest, not an ordinary one. From every branch of every tree hung a body, pale, lifeless, swinging slightly, as if some wind was playing with the dead. The trees were shaped like twisted humans. Their bark looked like faces locked in silent screams. The sky above had no stars, only swirling black mist that seemed to move like a predator searching for prey. Suddenly, the train stopped. No sound, no brakes. It simply froze. One of the passengers, an old man who had not spoken a word since the beginning, stood up slowly and stepped out. The doors opened for him as if invited. He walked outside and stood among the hanging bodies. Then he heard it. A voice, soft, gentle, familiar. It was his wife calling his name. She had died years ago in a fire. He turned toward the sound and saw nothing but mist. Still he moved forward, tears rolling down his cheeks. Then came the scream. His skin began to melt like wax. His bones cracked and turned black. He did not fight it. He smiled as he fell into a puddle of flesh the tunnel had fed. The psychic stood and finally spoke. Her voice calm but filled with fear. She said this was not a tunnel, it was a gate. A living gate that opened between the world of the living and the forgotten. It fed on pain and memories. It remembered everyone who had ever entered, and those it chose never left. The main character asked why the train was still running if the driver was gone. The psychic looked at him with empty eyes and said the words that froze everyone. This train does not run on fuel. It runs on pain, on fear, on human suffering. Every scream, every drop of sadness, every memory full of regret becomes its power. The more afraid you are, the faster it moves. The train is alive, and it is taking them deeper than hell. The lights went out. Darkness took over. Only the heartbeat of the tunnel remained. The deeper he went into the train, the less it felt like a machine and more like a living, breathing creature. The walls were no longer cold steel but warm and pulsing like veins. Each step echoed not with metal, but with a sick, wet sound, like walking across the stomach of something alive. The windows were blacked out completely now. There was no outside, no sky, no world, just this cursed tunnel, this moving coffin. He kept moving forward through the narrow passage until he reached the end, the place where the engine should be. His hands trembled as he grabbed the rusted iron handle and pulled open the final door. What lay beyond wasn't what any normal engine room should look like. There were no gears, no fire, no controls, no driver, just silence and a mirror. The mirror stood tall at the center of the room, almost as if it had been placed there as some kind of monument. Its frame was made of blackened brass, cracked and scorched. The surface of the mirror was covered in layers of old dust and streaks that looked like dried blood. Something about it pulled him in. Against every instinct screaming inside him, he stepped closer. As the dust began to clear, he saw something that froze his lungs. It was him, but not him. His reflection looked pale and sick, with hollow black eyes and a faint, dead smile. His skin was bruised and cracking at the edges. The figure in the mirror wasn't copying his movements. It stood still, head tilted slightly to one side, as if it were waiting. Beside the mirror, lying on a small decayed wooden table, was an ancient journal. Its cover was torn leather, faded by time, and it reeked of mildew and rust. He picked it up slowly and opened the first page. The handwriting was frantic, uneven, the kind of writing a man might leave behind after losing his mind. The name on the inside cover read, Thomas Greaves, 1924. The entries began calmly. Thomas had been a train conductor, proud of his work. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The writing grew darker, more desperate. He spoke of voices in the vents, people vanishing between stations, a tunnel that stretched too long, too deep. Then somewhere near the middle, one sentence was circled again and again in red ink. To escape, you must replace yourself. His heart raced. What did that mean, replace? Who with what? Then the lights in the room dimmed. A strange warmth moved through the air, followed by a scent of old perfume, and something far more rotten. A voice echoed behind him, soft, female, and broken. You're not the first. The voice said. He turned from the shadows. A woman stepped forward, her body floating just inches above the floor. Her face was cracked like shattered porcelain. Her eyes were dark hollows, her smile stitched from sorrow. She wore the uniform of a train hostess, but from another time, early 1900s, maybe earlier. Her presence chilled the room more than any cold could. She stared at him, not with hatred, but with pity. This tunnel feeds once every 100 years, she whispered. It demands 7 souls. 7 lives to keep moving, but 1 must remain. 1 must survive to drive the next train. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Drive the train. There's no driver, he muttered. There always is, she said. That mirror shows what comes next. It's not just a reflection, it's a preview. He looked back at the mirror. The dead-eyed version of himself now had one hand raised, pointing directly at him. Slowly, it placed its hand on the glass and a faint ripple spread across the surface like water. The woman continued. I was the first. I survived when the others didn't. I thought I'd escaped. But I was cursed to wander these rails, to watch each new century bring another group, another sacrifice. And now it's your turn. He backed away, heart pounding, trying to scream, trying to wake up, but nothing came out. His breath fogged the air. The mirror now showed him fully dressed in a conductor's uniform, cold, pale, eyes empty. It was like watching his own funeral. The journal slipped from his hands and landed on the floor with a dull thud. The final page flipped open by itself. In thick, smeared ink, one final message was scrawled across the page, almost as if it had been written in blood. You are the driver now. The train moved deeper into the heart of the tunnel, and with every passing moment, the silence grew heavier, as if something ancient was holding its breath. The passengers, once distant and cold, began to show signs of unraveling. One by one, they were pulled into their darkest truths, as if the train itself demanded not just their presence, but their confessions, their suffering, and their souls. The priest sat with his hands trembling, sweat pouring down his face despite the icy cold. He whispered to himself a prayer that soon turned into a confession. He spoke of a sin he had buried deep within him, a secret he thought God had forgotten. As the words left his mouth, the air around him shimmered. Flames erupted from his chest, not with heat, but with the weight of guilt. He stood burning from within, eyes wide open, mouth silent, and then he crumbled into ashes that blew away with the next flicker of light. The blind psychic woman sat motionless, her sightless eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Her breathing slowed as she reached up and touched her forehead. For years, she had seen the shadows others could not. Tonight, she tried to close the eye that gave her visions, but it refused. Blind psychic woman, sightless eyes, something unseen, breathing, touched forehead, shadows, visions, eye. It opened wider than ever before. Her screams were silent as a second set of eyes tore open on her forehead, and she began to see everything past future death, and something beyond even that. Her body froze, her skin turning gray, veins blackening like ink spreading through old parchment. She collapsed without a sound. The child, so quiet all this time, sat alone, holding the coffin-shaped box in his lap. His small hands slowly opened the lid. What lay inside, no one saw, but his face changed. No fear, no surprise, only acceptance. He stood up, stepped into the box as if returning home, and pulled the lid shut over himself. The box vanished. He was never there, only the main character remained. The train began to scream, not metal, not brakes, not machinery, real screams, human screams. They came from the walls, from the windows, from beneath the floor. The air shook, the lights above shattered in slow motion, darkness fell. He stood alone now, in the last coach of a train that had fed on fear-stolen lives, and now waited for its final offering. His breath was cold. The tunnel outside was alive, and the train itself was part of something far more ancient and cruel than anything he could have imagined. And somewhere deep ahead, the engine began to pulse again, not with coal or oil, but with the terror it had just consumed. The door to the engine room creaked open, waiting for him. The final soul, the last passenger, the next driver. The train had gone quiet. Not the peaceful silence of dawn, but the terrifying stillness that comes before something ancient awakens. No more whispers through the vents, no more footsteps behind the walls, no more cries from the doomed passengers. Every soul had vanished, taken, consumed or surrendered until only the main character remained alone, shaking, breathing shallow as if even the air had turned hostile. Ahead stood the door to the engine room. It wasn't just metal anymore. It pulsed slightly, like it had veins behind it, like it was alive. The walls sweated. The lights above flickered, trying not to betray what came next. The air grew heavier with every step. With each footfall, he could feel something watching from inside, something that had been waiting for centuries. He pushed the door. Inside, the engine room was not what he expected. There were no controls at first, no driver's seat, no windows, just an endless mirror bolted to the far wall. The reflection it showed wasn't his, not truly. The person in the mirror looked like him, but the skin was pale, lips blue, eyes hollow like they'd been emptied out. It was the version of him that had died on this train 100 times over. And then behind the mirror, something flickered. The engine room shifted, gears burst from the floor. Rusted pipes writhed like snakes. A giant lever emerged from a shadowed corner surrounded by strange runes etched into scorched metal. It looked like a ritual, not a machine. Hanging beside it was a uniform, black as ink, pressed perfectly folded. Waiting on the floor lay a weathered journal. Its pages were crumbling from age, but one line remained bold and burned into the paper. To escape, you must replace yourself. He didn't want to. But what choice did he have? The demon had told him the tunnel demands 7 souls every 100 years and 1 survivor to guide the next ride. That survivor was him now. The moment he walked in, The train had already chosen. He approached the uniform with trembling hands. It didn't feel like cloth. It was too warm, too soft. It felt like skin, human, tanned and preserved. Still, he slid the coat over his arms. The moment it touched his body, something snapped inside him. He gasped, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of nothingness. His name gone, his memories fading like mist on a mirror. He reached for the final piece, the conductor's cap. As he placed it on his head, the room groaned, and the lever lit up with a crimson glow. The same glow he'd seen when the other passengers were taken, the glow of the train feeding. He walked forward, slow, hollow, as if he had died somewhere behind him, and what now moved was only a shell. His hand gripped the lever. The moment he pulled it, the world shattered. Screams erupted from every bolt in the train. The walls bled. The lights exploded into sparks. But through it all, he stood calm, his eyes now dim and gray, his pulse gone. He was no longer a passenger. He was the conductor, the keeper of the tunnel's curse, the soul who would guide the next doomed ride. The train roared back to life. It rumbled forward through darkness, deeper into the cursed tracks that never ended. As the wheels screeched against the rails, fog began to rise in the carriages again. Seats reset themselves, windows cleared, shadows crawled back to their positions. The ritual had restarted, and outside the world had moved on. By dawn, across the quiet town of Ravensmire, reports started flooding in. One train was spotted. No schedule, no warning. Moving along a track that had been sealed for over 50 years, news anchors broke the story. Midnight Express seen moving on abandoned track near Ravensmire. Authorities found no passengers, no crew, no evidence of recent operation. Just scorched marks on the rails and doors that closed themselves. Only one camera caught it, a security feed from a roadside watchtower. It captured the train gliding through the fog, the headlamp flickering like a heartbeat. As it passed, the camera zoomed into the driver's cabin, and there, standing silently, was a man in black eyes glowing. No expression, no life. The driver wasn't someone else. It was you. The screen glitches. The lights flicker in your room somewhere, far down a tunnel. No one dares map. The train waits, and tonight it's your turn to drive.